termination for convenience isn't free. I mean, when the government chooses to terminate for convenience, they are going in eyes wide open, knowing that it's going to cost something.
Welcome to the Optimize podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to have Jeff Shapiro as our host for this series. Jeff is a partner at Cohn Resnick with over 20 years of experience in financial management, federal contract auditing, and compliance. In this series, Jeff and his guests will be diving into the challenges and trends shaping the GovCon space. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Jeff on this episode.
Welcome, everyone, for another episode of the Optimize podcast brought to you by VisibleThread. I'm your host, Jeff Shapiro. Good to be with you today. I've got a really good guest for you all. I've been talking and working with this person for a number of years. We've taught several sessions together out in beautiful San Diego and on the web. And so here we are again, getting together again. Marsha Lindquist, welcome to our podcast.
Hey, Jeff, thank you so much for having me as another guest. I appreciate the opportunity to converse with you and share stories, right?
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. You're going to surprise me with a bunch. I know we talked beforehand about a couple of things we'll talk about today, but Marsha is always good for a good story. Hey, let me give everyone a quick background on you. Marsha is the president of Granite Leadership Strategies Incorporated, and she is a strategic pricing and finance expert for government contractors. In her groundbreaking #1 Amazon best-selling books, Secrets of Strategic Pricing for Government Contractors, Marsha delivers the wisdom of strategic pricing for federal proposals. And while being that best-selling author, we'll touch upon those kinds of themes. But today we're going to focus on a really hot topic. With the DOGE coming in, taking a chainsaw to agencies and programs left and right, there has been quite the influx of stop work orders, terminations, and we've seen a lot of them between the both of us, and we want to impart some of the best practices contractors can do to get ready. And then if and when those do come, what do you do? So that's what today we'll primarily be talking about. I'm really looking forward to this, Marsha. But before we do that, all right, we got to have a little bit of fun. So, Marsha, how did you fall into government contracting? No one studies government contracting in university. It very rarely. I mean, that's a sort of a new thing. So can you tell us your story on how you got into this, and especially how did you get to strategic pricing? That's a unique niche that you fill.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Um, people don't usually ask me how I fell into this. You're right, we didn't study it in university. That's correct. I studied marketing and accounting in university, right? So I guess there's some, and then finance in my master's degree. So there's some groundwork, Jeff. But um, when I started to work for McDonnell Douglas was really when I got started in government contracting. Now, I won't completely date myself, but let's just say it was a number of decades ago. And I started out, and I was fortunate. I worked for a division of McDonnell Douglas that was a little bit different than you would normally see. And so I got to work in pricing first, right? And then my boss said, "Wow, you've got a great background. I need someone who's an accounting manager." So I got to work in accounting. And then we were lacking a contracts manager. So I got to work as a contracts manager. And then I went back to working in pricing, and then I worked overhead. I worked every aspect of if you will, the finance part of government contracting. So I kind of got my feet wet in several different areas, Jeff, and I liked them all, but I love pricing. It's my first love, and it will probably always be my first love, Jeff.
Yeah, so you've stuck with it all this time. So now here
Yes.
you are advising folks day to day, like, what's the motivation? What, you know, every company is different, Marsha. Not everyone has the same, you know, structure. Not you're as far as I
Right.
know, you're industry agnostic. I mean, we're all government
Yes.
contractors based on, an industry which is based on your client instead of actually what you do for a living. Uh, but you seem to work a little bit and touch different areas.
Well, it's really funny because people ask me, "What industry do I support?" And I really support a lot of different industries.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, before I went to McDonnell Douglas, um, I did work for Bechtel Power Corporation. I worked in
Oh wow.
construction. I worked in home building. I worked in oil and gas. So my early career was in that. And very honestly, for example, I mean, one of my clients right now is a construction environmental services company. So
Perfect.
I'm going to be calling back all of that background in construction, to bring to bear all of the things related to strategic pricing, because that's what they want. That's what they need. But, I work in the softer stuff in the services, Jeff, but I also work with, contracts and grants as well, for some of the environmental and energy related things. So it varies, but to me, the industry doesn't matter. You're right, because what we do uh, for for our clients vis-a-vis pricing, vis-a-vis the cost accounting, vis-a-vis contracts, terminations, all of that to some degree doesn't matter. I mean, it does because the clauses and things are all different, but I've had enough background in various industries that, frankly, for me, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Pretty much I can handle them all, so to speak.
I love it. It's very impressive. As you can tell, listeners, Marsha is someone I go to for advice all the time because it's great to get that kind of great diverse expertise. And so let's jump off from there. The FAR does not, and then that was where I was going with this. The FAR doesn't necessarily delineate by industry. Yes, there's few things that, for construction contracts follow these rules.
Right.
For R&D contracts follow these rules. So there's a couple little bit of a specialty, we'll call it, items, but generally the same rules pretty much apply to all. And so we're here to talk about terminations, Marcia. Whether you're in construction, whether you're in consulting,
Right.
whether you're do IT services, whatever it may be, you get that you get that stop work order. You get that termination. Besides the anticipation and having that crystal ball, like what can you do to
Mhm.
ready yourself for getting that notice?
Well, let me say this. People say to me, "What do I do?" They're wringing their hands. They're worried, and what I usually do, a good contracts person that I am, the first thing I say to people is, "Go read your contract." When in doubt, read the contract. And people say to me, "Well, what part of the contract?" The whole thing, you know? And people say when I'm looking for something, "Where did you find that, Marcia?" Usually it's on the first or second or third page of what I'm looking for. Now, admittedly, termination information may not be there. It's going to be further on down. You're going to scroll into section I probably to find it. But generally, first thing you ought to do when you're not sure about what's going to happen to you is to pull out your contract. Take a look at it, read it. Maybe you didn't even read it when you signed it. Okay. Which is what I find to be the case more often than not, Jeff. So maybe this is the first time you're reading your contract. Having said that, okay?
Oh,
So that's the first thing that you do. Now, are you saying, I haven't gotten a stop work, I haven't gotten a termination for convenience yet? Is that what you mean, Jeff?
yeah.
Uh,
So, like,
I'm just wringing my hands.
are you playing invincible person? Like, they'll never come for me.
Right. Well,
I
surprise.
don't know if that. What do you think of that strategy?
That's probably not gonna happen. Now, it
No.
doesn't mean it's gonna happen across the board for all of your contracts.
Correct.
However, you know, if you are if you're pretty plugged in with your government officials, you should know whether something's gonna be coming or not. You should be well aware of what's going on with your either weekly or monthly meetings, right, Jeff?
Yeah, they start canceling them. There's a sign. So yeah,
Absolutely true.
read the leaves. I mean, we all saw the recent memo from DoD saying, "Hey, for all consulting contracts, you need to explain the rationale why you have these contracts."
Right.
So, anyways, being proactive probably is going to be key to that. Anyways, go back to all right, you're that contractor is like hasn't been terminated or stop ordered yet, but you're a consultant. Let's put you in that perspective. What are you doing?
Okay. Well, if I'm a consultant, I'm going to be talking to my clients and saying, okay, which is what I'm doing now.
Hmm.
And I'm saying to them, if you get a termination, here's some things that you're going to need to do. Okay. First of all, you're going to want to look to make sure that you've got probably some FAR Part 49 in your contract because FAR Part 49 is what's going to prevail here. The other thing that you're going to want to know is that the contracting officer has a role here. And then that role may get turned over to somebody else. Okay. If you end up with a termination decision, shall we put it that way, you
Yep.
will get a termination notice. Okay. And if you get a termination notice, just know that there'll be an appointment of a termination contracting officer if the CO determines or wishes to delegate it to somebody else. Okay. And that's not up to you. Okay. It's an administrative requirement to have something like that come about, Jeff. Okay. So keep in mind that if that happens, it may not be the same person that you know and love. Okay. So having said that, just be ready. Okay. Now, let's say that you have gotten or you've received either a stop work or you have received a termination for convenience notice. Now, what do you do, right? So, there's 5 things that you need to do, Jeff, okay?
All right.
5. Let's keep it simple. There's more than but that's more behind that, but let's start there, okay? First of all, you have to stop all work completely. Or if it's a partial termination for convenience, you would terminate the partial work that they've said that they are terminating. They may continue some other work. They may continue stop the whole thing. We don't know. You need to stop work and terminate. Here's the most important part: any applicable subcontracts that you may have. Okay. So if you have no subcontracts, you're good to go, right? But if you do, you've got to give the same notice to your subcontractors that you received as well, quickly, like the day you get it. Okay,
Yes, please. Yeah, that should be your next phone call.
that your next
Well,
phone
after
call after
your
you.
program manager, you probably want to start talking to your subs.
Now, you do need to protect and preserve government property if you have any of that. So that's kind of right behind the subcontract piece of this. Okay. You also need to settle any outstanding liabilities and terminations with your subcontractors. So if you have any a- anything that you owe those subcontractors, you need to get into discussions about what it is and determine what do you owe them. Okay. And then here's the part that's really important. You need to set up an accounting procedure to identify and collect the termination costs. Make sure that you do that. Okay. Now, I'm going to have to give a bad story here, Jeff.
No boy.
It's a flag. Okay.
Yep.
And that is that When you get a termination for convenience notice, please, please, please do not just walk away. Okay? It's not the time to just, you know, go crazy, get rid of people and throw your hands in the air and say, okay, that's it. We're shutting our doors, kind of a thing. You can't do that because the government owes you. Let me
Keep
just
going.
say
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. Let's hear that again. That's a
The government owes you. Okay. It's not so simple as we're turning off the faucet. Yes, you're turning off the faucet, government. I get that. But as a contractor, you have an obligation. I'm going to call it that. I know most people wouldn't use that word. I'm going to use the word obligation.
last I checked, that contracts are signed by both parties, right?
Correct, Jeff.
Go, keep going.
So I'm going to use the word obligation. You have an obligation to fulfill your contract and finish out what needs to be done, even if it's terminated for convenience. Now, terminated for convenience means that you were not terminated for default. Okay. Let's keep that in mind. Okay.
That's different.
This does not mean you did anything wrong. Okay. It means that the government is really doing this truly for convenience. Okay. So you're going to set up the accounting procedures and identify and collect your termination costs. We want you to do that. Why? Because the government doesn't get off scot free. You have any bad stories about this part, Jeff, too? I bet.
No. Wait a second. You're not allowed to question the host. Who wrote that in
I
the rule? No,
can.
no, 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 no. No, I agree. Uh, one story I'll relay. I don't know if this totally relates to this, but know that once you get terminated, apparently it's not a permanent decision these days. I have now heard multiple stories, and one directly to a client where they hired us to help them with their termination settlement proposal. They had already riffed the people that were working on the contract. It's a small business. They didn't have an opportunity to pick those people up and try to assign them to another project, which, to your best efforts is what you're theoretically supposed to do as a contractor. But if you're a small business, you're like, I'm not going to hang on to this person on the bench. I can't afford that.
Right.
So we let them go because the government gave us every intention that that's it. Thank you. Thank you for playing. Let us know what we owe you. So, but week later, we about to do our weekly status update. They told us, hey, great news. The government called us and said, contract's back on and they want to exercise the next option year. I was like, congratulations. Good luck hiring those people back who now have PTSD from having to be involved in something like that. And, I don't blame them. I mean, that's a huge culture issue these companies all going to have to deal with. If you don't see it happening to you, you're seeing it to the people in the cubicle next to you at the government location that you're working at. You're seeing it in your neighbors. This is a real issue that people are going to be really worried about being a federal contractor. And so, yeah, so they turned it back on. Not only did they turn it back on, Marsha, they also said, in order to turn this back on, you're going to have to waive your right to any damages as a result of us saying,
Wow.
oops, I terminated you.
Oops. Oh my God.
Well,
Yikes.
I felt terrible. I'm like, that's a business. Now you have a business decision.
Right.
Uh, and most businesses are going to say, fine, I'll take the additional work long term. But yeah, I just now I'm going to have to spend more money on recruiting because out of the 10 people I just laid off, I'm going to have to find one or two more that, are looking for a job and who knows what, and I have to retrain them. And
And they
now
hadn't planned
performance
on it.
risk is a thing.
Right.
So yeah, that's my recent story for you on
Well, the
related to this
recent
topic.
story that I have relates to contractors who literally say, "Up, I got a termination notice. I'm going to get rid of everybody." And they literally walk away. They literally do not do anything. Please, please, please don't do that. I've had,
At least do the calculations. You got to
right.
consider, like, what did you invest to get these people there? Did you pay recruiter costs? Did you build a
Correct.
factory? Did you build a
Right.
special piece of equipment that was used for testing? I mean, it depends on the type of contract, no doubt about it. I mean, if
Yes.
you're truly butts and seats where you're literally just filling in administrative assistance, is there much to it? Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe not.
But still, if you can't reassign them, you had to honor your severance policy that you have in place. I don't know. Seems like
It's
an easy claim to me.
it is. So, Jeff, let's talk about I don't mean to change the subject, but let's
Okay.
talk about what can go into a termination clause.
Please.
Well,
Please.
let's talk about that. So now you've got these people, like you were saying, Jeff, that you hired, okay? And maybe you've got some upfront costs that you invested. Maybe even you had to train people upfront, maybe even before your contract started, Jeff.
Ooh, I like
So
this. Keep going.
maybe I was getting juicy with this, okay? I'm bringing it on, okay? Because maybe you had to train some people and you were awarded the contract, but you didn't officially start, but you had to train some of those people. Now comes the revolution, as I call it, right? And you get to potentially, I'll say potentially, recover some of those costs that you had to put in up front. Okay. When you get a termination for convenience, a lot of things that maybe weren't in view before come into view now. Okay. So I don't want you to think that it's just your contract costs. Yes, it is costs that you expended as of the date of termination. Sure. Okay. That's easy, right? But it's more than that, Jeff. It's, the accounting costs, specifically related to your settlement proposal, the legal costs, the clerical costs, any other costs reasonably I'm gonna say use these words, reasonably necessary for preparing the termination settlement proposal and the supporting data. Now, because you have to support the data. You can't just go, well, I think it's about this much or that much. It can't be a thumb in the air or a finger in the air, right? It has to be based on fact of real expenditures. Okay. Um, if you have to terminate and settle your subcontract, suppose you have some legal costs involved with settling up with your subcontractors. That's included in the cost of this termination settlement. Okay if you've got, uh, a storage, transportation, Jeff, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
That's a good one.
Cost for, that you've incurred for preserving or protecting, security, storage, disposition of, inventory, for example, right? All of those kinds of things are part and parcel of this termination claim. It's not so simple, right? I mean, people this is not just, "Okay, all right, it's an extra couple of bucks," right? So, some costs that you may have had as an overhead type cost or G&A
Mm-hmm.
type cost
Mm-hmm.
now become potentially a direct cost as part of the settlement proposal, okay? If you have to settle up inventory, like, you may have production, right? You may have materials, tools, parts, components, I don't know, okay? You may have some engineering costs. You may have some startup costs, right? Back to what I was saying, that
Mm-hmm.
you now get to recover, okay? Um, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some other costs, Jeff. Um,
No,
they need to be proper charges that are related to, if you will, tidying up this termination for convenience. So anything that you incur, Jeff, that you may not have had, shall I say, as a direct cost of this contract, now becomes a cost reimbursable item, basically.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I use a very basic principle when I talk to my clients. If not for this contract, I would not have incurred the following costs. If not for
Mhm.
this contract, I would not have bought 10 laptops that are this high level of encryption that,
Right.
only people on this contract and some other contracts or, whatever it may be that would cause a material distortion of costs or, yeah, or I specifically built this factory to
Right.
develop this widget and, I had special conditions. I bought this special tool like you just referred to.
Mhm.
Well, now I don't have another contract to move it to, and and quite honestly, will the government take possession of it and transfer it to another company? They might, and that's part of this process, right? But
Right.
you didn't fully cost it during the period of performance during the entire of the contract. Yeah, you better go make sure you're not out of pocket for any of that, because if not for this contract, you wouldn't have built that equipment. You wouldn't have brought in that special tool, that testing equipment, whatever it may be.
Right. Right.
So Marsha, so you referenced it, turning things into cost plus. I mean, we all have different types of contracts out there. Some are
Right.
commercial,
Right.
some are fixed price, and some are even cost plus. Can you talk about the differences, how those settlement claims would look based on those
I
types of
can.
contracts?
Well, termination for convenience. Let me just say this.
Yes, go.
In a commercial world, there probably is a termination clause. It may not be called termination for convenience, or it may be called that. Okay.
Yeah, a
Um,
constructive change or
right,
something. Is that what you're getting at? Okay, keep
right,
going. Sorry.
right. But in government contracting parlance, termination for convenience is a term, it's a clause. It's actually in the federal acquisition regulations. It's referenced in FAR Part 49 extensively. Okay. And then, two, we see the various clauses in FAR Part 52. In particular, there's a whole bunch of them. I'm trying to remember all of them, but in why am I is it escaping me right now, but it is escaping me.
That's okay.
Um, but keep in mind that there are different types depending upon the type of contract you have,
Correct.
okay? So a fixed price contract, Jeff, you're gonna have clauses that say termination for convenience fixed price. There may be some termination for convenience fixed price short form, and those are going to be usually under $100,000.
Yep.
But you're going to look again back to what I said at the top of our discussion.
Yeah.
Read your contract. Okay. So my point is that you got to know which clause you have. When you go read your contract, pull out the FAR again for the first time, as I like to say, and read what the FAR says about that termination clause you have in your contract, okay? Because it's gonna prevail, okay? Now, what happens in a fixed price situation? In a fixed price situation, Jeff, you're going to get reimbursed for the costs you, for the fixed price that you had as of the date of a termination. However, all of these costs that we just talked about become cost reimbursable. So you kinda have a hybrid on your hands to a
Correct.
large degree. I don't
Sure.
know how else to put it. I mean, I don't wanna say that your fixed price contract becomes cost reimbursable because that's not true, but parts of it do become cost reimbursable, if that helps. Does that make sense,
Sure.
Jeff?
No, absolutely. No, that's right. Yeah. You're on contract to deliver 50 widgets. You've already delivered 40. You
Right,
probably already billed for the fixed price of delivering 40 of the 50. But now you've been in process of making the other 10. You got to find a way to account for that work in process and
right.
get adequately, for the lack of a better word, reimbursed for what you put, the efforts that you put into that. And then, oh, by the way, what do you do with that work in process? Is that something that you can pick up and be like, well, here's a half an engine, enjoy. You got to work that out.
So the fixed price, I like to say becomes a hybrid,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, I agree.
It's a great way of saying it, that the fixed price part of it doesn't go away, but now you add a layer on top of it. You've got some cost reimbursable parts of it. Okay. Now, cost plus contracts stays cost plus. Okay. It just stays cost plus. So, but the settlement is the total cost incurred as the date of termination. Okay. Plus, you add to that the cost of settlement with your subcontractor. Plus, you add the cost of settlement. We just talked about all of those things that maybe heretofore are an indirect cost become a direct cost. Okay. Um, there's an allowance for profit. Okay. Now, you're not going to get well, or you're not going to get weller, better on the government here. Okay. This is not the Wild West. Okay. You recover your profit on what you incurred. You're not recovering profit on the settlement costs,
Yeah,
if you
they're
will,
not getting a
Jeff.
profit on hiring you, Marcia, to help them
Correct.
prepare the settlement.
Right. But they get to recover those costs at least, which is, I think, an important piece of this.
Or at least
Okay.
they can try, but we'll get to that later.
We'll get to that. But so you take out of it the items you delivered and they accepted already. Okay. Um, you take out any kind of credits that you may have, that kind of thing. So, so some things come into play. I can't get into everything here, neither can you, but but
Let us
but
know.
you get the idea, okay?
Yeah, I
Now,
mean, you buy a bunch of supplies that they're sitting on the shelf and you can't use it somewhere. Yeah, go return them and
right,
get your credit.
right. It's kind of like me. I bought a whole pile of dog food for my dog, and yesterday they changed the diet like severely. So
Oh,
now I have 4 cases of this dog food that I have to call the vendor for today and return it.
yep,
Same thing.
yep,
Okay. No
yep.
different. Think of it
Yep.
like that. Okay. Um, another thing that I want to keep in mind.
Yes.
Everything that we are talking about as recoverable costs must be in accordance with FAR Part 31, the contract cost principles. Okay. So you don't throw that out the window. So that's still an important piece of this. Okay. Um, the CO is real, or the termination contracting officer largely is going to um, rely on your proposal, the accounting records. They're going to rely on what you've documented. Okay, now, and we're going to talk about an audit in just a minute, but
Getting
I
there.
want to say this. Here's an important piece of this. There are some allowances for estimates in what we're doing, Jeff. Okay, on this settlement proposal. But it's up to the contractor to prove, let me underline the word prove,
Please.
that the estimates are more than just my speculation. The estimates, so in other words, you could prepare your settlement proposal based on some estimates, but you got to have documentation to support the estimates. Okay. Now, I got to take a backtrack for just a second, Jeff.
All out.
There is a strategy involved with putting together this settlement proposal. Okay. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. In my opinion, there is always a strategy involved in anything that you are doing related to doing any pricing. And when you're preparing a settlement proposal, you are preparing a pricing. Okay. So when you sit down after you have gone, oh my God, right? And done the 5 things we talked about at the beginning, then you must sit down and rather than just start accumulating data. I want you to sit down with leadership and come up with a strategy of what are the various things that we have to consider in putting this settlement proposal together, Jeff. Okay. I don't know if that helps
Yep.
your thinking a
I,
little
my
bit.
my my general strategy is you got to find a way to be creative in thinking about how your company was affected as a result of this termination. So think all the way back to the beginning and to the current day. You know, whether it's simply getting back the folks that have been TDY to do the research over in
Right.
Antarctica, like you still get to fly those people back. Like even if it's not the day of termination, like if you can't get, this is an extreme example. Like I don't
Right.
think there's commercial flights to Antarctica. So they're gonna might take them a month to get them back. You darn right. You can, whatever that cost is, you will still be able to recover it, even though it's technically after this now terminated POP. So yeah, thinking forward to back and doing what you can within those cost principles, like you said, you know, to maximize the amount that you're going to propose as your settlement. Because at the end of the day, you still need to certify. And I don't know if
Right.
you want to talk about that. You probably should, since you're the guest. I mean, what's it mean to certify your claim?
So let's talk about that briefly, and then
Yes.
I
Yeah, we
want to
still
say
have to go
one. Hang on 1 second with the certification piece of it, because I do want to put the framework on the strategy. Okay,
Okay, sorry. Go
when
ahead.
you're saying back to front, we do mean that quite literally. So you're turning the clock back, right? You're not only turning it back to when you started the contract, you need to turn it back before you started the contract. Where, like as we talked about before, were there things that you did to put in place getting ready to start the contract? Okay. If you incurred some costs before the actual start date, I'm going to put that in air quotes. Okay. You need to consider that. That's part of your strategy is in including that kind of thing into your settlement proposal, okay? You also, like Jeff, you're saying, you need to fast forward a little bit and say, what are the things that are gonna lag, right? Because there are gonna be things that you have no control over how long some of those things are gonna take to resolve, okay? Like you're saying, if I've got engineers in Antarctica and it's gonna take them a month to get back and, they have to be on an ice cutter or something like that, uh, eh eh, you know, it's going to take a while, and those costs are not your cost to bear the brunt of, they're the government's, okay? Termination for convenience, let me say this, termination for convenience isn't free, okay? I mean, when the government chooses to terminate for convenience, they are going in eyes wide open, knowing that it's going to cost something to shut it down. And it's not just costs incurred of today, okay, as of this date. So, having said that, let's, wow, we want to talk about certification. I just
Yeah,
talked
we,
about,
we can go back to that. We put that in the parking lot, but I
let's
want
put
to
that
also
there.
address. I'm a fixed. I've been only working on fixed price contracts, Marcia, and I don't have a accounting system that differentiates between direct and indirect costs. I don't have a indirect rate structure. Am I out of luck?
No, you're
So to
not out
your
of luck.
point on, I'm sorry, I'm setting that up because you did happen to mention that you may have some imperfect records on that.
Yes, you may have some imperfect records. Now is not the time to throw, how I say, throw your hands up in the air. You are going to have to do something to actually accumulate and keep records of all of the costs that you are going to be claiming because they will come under scrutiny. Okay. If you haven't incurred them, or maybe you haven't incurred them yet, and you were talking about estimates back to where we were, Jeff.
Yes, that's what
Okay.
I want to finish on. Yep.
You have to maintain records for audit purposes. Okay. That we're going to segue into
And
that.
that'll be next.
Okay. Uh, that you need to prepare your audit file from the moment you get that termination notification. Okay. From the moment you get that, and you don't have an accounting system, you've got to create some kind of a trail that will allow you to accumulate. If they're the estimates, then create a file structure that allows you to accumulate the estimates by the type of cost so that you can produce your documentation that shows where your estimate came from, Jack. Okay. Because some of these small contractors, like you say, they've been doing fixed price contracts. They don't have a cost reimbursable accounting system that doesn't absolve you of the obligation to maintain the records, Jeff.
Agreed.
That say, okay, I'm claiming $100,000 of legal costs. Here are all of my basis for those estimates. Okay. Okay. I have receipts. I have estimates from these 3 legal firms, I have estimates from the accounting firm, you actually have documentation that shows where those estimates came from, okay? Um, Let me see, what else do I wanna talk about? Oh, I do wanna touch on costs that continue after termination,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay? I
Yeah.
don't wanna I don't wanna lose that thought, that trail. Um, Costs that can't be discontinued immediately after termination are, let me say this, are generally allowable, okay? If you have to recall people from distant work locations like Antarctica, right? Or if you have leased facilities or equipment that can't be turned off right now, like they have to be terminated with 30 days notice, for example, Jeff, okay?
Mhm. Yep.
You have to do, as a contractor, you have, I'm going to use the word obligation again. You have an obligation to make efforts to minimize costs to the degree you can. Okay. So you have to show that you did that. Okay. I gave notice to my subcontractors on this date. I gave notice to my facilities uh, management. And maybe you've got 3 months. I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
but you have to do that. You have to do your best efforts to minimize those costs and do everything that you can to document that in the audit file. Okay. I think we talked about there are things that are may normally be treated as an overhead cost that can be reclassified as a direct cost, provided they are withdrawn from the overhead pool. You can't take 2 bites of the same apple, Jeff. Okay?
Nope.
You can't claim it as a direct cost on this contract for settlement and put it into the overhead pool. So you can't.
Even if it was negotiated, like if that, your contract is
Right,
5 years, you've already negotiated FY 22, 23 by some miracle, you have to say, "Hey, listen, this was
right.
already covered within my overhead, so I'm gonna do my best to carve out that portion that was agreed
Right.
that covered by all these other contracts, but 24 hasn't been audited yet. Now in 25, it's in process. Now I'm gonna pull out that rest." So you gotta show that analysis.
You've got to do the homework, so to
You
speak,
gotta do your
okay?
homework. Yeah, so, and, yeah, we're gonna transition to talking about the audit or at least analysis portion of this.
Okay.
You know, to sort of steal a Stephen Covey-ism, you know, begin your termination settlement with the end in mind. And I think, Marsha, you've been talking several things about this. Like, when you're trying to figure this out, keep records. Like, why did you determine that? How did you do that?
Right.
Because what will eventually is going to happen, not in all cases, but in many, it's going to get some scrutiny of some sort. Whether it's the TCO doing it, whether it's a designated auditor doing it, whether, God forbid, it's a court or future lawyer for the Department of Justice. I mean, who knows how far that could
Correct.
potentially go, depending on the size and risk and all that kind of stuff. But someone's going to come look at this, and oh,
Yes.
and by the way, people preparing this may not be around a year or two later because you've had all these layoffs and you can only keep so many people around, while unfortunately, mass terminations are happening. If that could be your case. Anyway, so maybe I'm stealing some of your thunder here, but
It
Marsha, talk to us, what to expect in an audit or,
Okay.
scrutiny
Let
of your
let
claim.
let's talk about the audit for just a wee bit here.
Yeah.
Okay. If you first of all, your documentation is paramount, okay? The moment that you get that termination notice means that aside from, as I say, giving the notices, the next thing you're going to do is prepare your file structure if you don't have an accounting system for accumulating those kind of costs somehow, okay? So don't get dissuaded by the fact that you don't have an accounting system to handle it. You're going to create what you need in that audit file structure, okay? Now, does it mean that there's necessarily going to be an auditor? No. There might be, there might not be. The audit may come from the termination contracting officer. It may come from DCAA. It may come from, uh, you're right, it could come from justice. I don't know.
Yeah. Yep. Uh-huh.
So it may come from who knows where. So you still need to be prepared for it, okay? Now, and if you are if you're not worried about pre-contract cost or initial startup costs or that kind of thing, so you're accumulating things as they're being incurred. But it is entirely possible that you've got history and maybe ancient history to worry about, okay? If you've got pre-contract costs, you had to relocate to a larger facility, you had to hire and train additional staff, you had some setup costs, for example, that kind of thing. Then you're gonna have to take a deep dive into your accounting records to pull that kind of information out, okay? And not everybody has that situation, but if you do have that situation, excuse me, you're gonna have to pull that information out.
Great.
I don't think I wanna talk yet on assets or lost value of assets because that's getting a little esoteric, Jeff, but,
Yeah, that's fine. We
we'll leave that alone, but
save
okay.
that for questions after
We'll
the
say that, okay. But you could have rental costs that
absolutely.
you would have to come into play. So all of this kind of forms your audit file,
Yep.
if you will, okay,
Yep.
including your subcontractor claims.
I, we haven't touched on that yet, and
I
that
know.
opens Pandora's box. But do you want to briefly talk about the risks that subcontractors have? I mean, you may want to rewind a bit on that and the
Phew, I
importance
do.
on you're a former contracts manager as well, so like
Yes.
understanding, building that kind of language into subcontracts, whether you're on either
Oh
side,
my god, yeah.
getting enough information from the sub saying, listen, typically I have a year to prepare these claims, but that means I'm going to need this much shorter of a year from you so I
Right.
could put everything together in one story. There's not going to be I'm going to submit mine and then you could submit yours to the government. L-
Uh-uh.
Privity. You want to talk about all that kind of good stuff?
Well, let me talk about the subcontractor claim, okay?
Please.
You have and that's a good point. You have a year from the
Typically.
date of the
Typically.
notice to actually file your settlement proposal. Now, having said that, your subcontractor has less time, okay? Um, they have to prepare their claim the same way you do, okay? Um, generally, what they have incurred or what they are incurring is also allowable as well, okay? But again, take a look at FAR Part 31.205, and make sure you're okay with all of 205. Um, you have to arrive at the subcontract claim, um, at an arm's length relationship, okay? You can't kinda hover together and say, "Okay, well, I'm gonna pad it," and that kinda thing. It has to reflect sound, exercise of prudent judgment by the prime contractor. You've got to be not that you are the government, but you're sort of acting like the government when you're settling this claim with your subcontractor, okay? The government does not have privity of contract with your subcontractor. You, prime contractor, are it. Let me put it that way.
Yep.
So if they don't want to share data with you, then guess what? It's kind of a too bad. Then it's not in the claim, okay? They can't I I don't wanna say you can't request an assist audit because some larger companies,
Yeah, I
you
think there's
would.
some language in certain clause. Again, read your contract. There's a way for TCOs to be able to get access directly to subcontract support because of that
Mhm.
proprietary nature of that data. But yeah, I mean, the better information that you can get, this is now talking almost similar to like price and cost analysis when you're buying the subcontracts in the first place.
Right.
99.9% of subs are not going to give you their books and records so you can make a determination whether or not the price you're paying them is fair and reasonable. But excuse me, the cost that you're paying them is fair and reasonable. So you kind of got to do your own price analysis. It's a
You do.
similar kind of deal with these subs when they're saying, yeah, I had to lay these people up. I had to bring, I had to store all these goods and, waiting on the decision for the government and what to do with it, that's not free for me to put it in a storage locker, temperature control, whatever it may be. Yeah, you just got to do yeah. Maybe you may have to obviously
You've
that
got to do the
yourself.
hard work.
You got to do homework. You got to ask questions, and do what you can to try to collect the data yourself. But they'll probably fall short. They're not going to share with you, most likely, indirect rate application or individuals' salary rates or anything like that. But so you have to go back and do your homework. All right. On average, the wrap rate for this industry is 1 point whatever. And then that person's salary ends up being this many dollars. Yep. I can do my own salary survey to see if that sounds right. They're not trying to rip me off. Good. Okay. Again, to your point, Marsha, show that homework.
Do the
And so you've
homework.
done your own homework. That'll only help the government have more confidence in what you submitted.
Let me say this. You bring up a very, very important point, Jeff, and that's the price analysis that you did when you proposed it in the first place
Yeah.
is the similar kind of activity you're doing here. It's
Yeah.
not really very different.
I agree.
Right? So what you did then has to prevail now. So pull out that price analysis you did to make sure that your subcontract costs were appropriate, back to, the clause that was imposed on you as the prime. And now you pull it out, you do the same thing all over again. Okay. A couple of little caveats. I want to make sure I get these in here because I don't want to forget them. They're popping in my head. Okay.
Love it. Yep. Please share.
You can't recover anticipated profits. Okay. All right. Professional services costs, like legal, as an example, cannot be contingent, if you will, or conditional on recovery of your settlement proposal. Okay. It has to be, this is what it's going to cost. Okay. It can't be, well, if you recover $1 million, the legal cost would be 15% of that. If you get something less than that, I'm just pulling numbers out of the
No,
air.
good.
My point is the professional services cost must be something that is bona fide actual cost or going to be an estimate of that.
Yes.
Keep one thing in mind here. It's the nature of the work that's being performed in the settlement of this, not when it's performed, that determines the allowability. Okay. So it's not when those folks from Antarctica show up, it's the fact that you got to get them back. To cut to the chase on that, Jeff.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Let me see what else. The audit. Okay. An audit may be done and it may not be. Let's face it. Okay. There's no
Yeah,
guarantee.
I've heard that the government is laying some people off. So is there going to be enough people to review some of this stuff?
There may not be. There may not be, actually. So,
Yeah.
the contracting officer may use any reasonable method to arrive at, if you will, a negotiated amount. Okay. Again, no profit on settlement expenses, but profit on what you did for the work. Okay. Timing of this. If I were you, I would be aiming to get this in as soon as possible. That doesn't mean that you hurry through it, but you have to be judicious about getting it in, because the sooner you get it in, the sooner it's going to be resolved. Let me face it. Okay. And again, it may not get audited. So you really want to make sure that you do get it in as soon as possible. Okay. The story about the audit. I have a story about an audit. So when I have done a settlement proposal, this goes back a number of years, Jeff.
Mhm.
What happened was that the auditor, and it was not when we're in the situation that we're in right now, laying people off, but we did have an auditor examine the documents, right, and determine that they were fair and reasonable documentation, right? And then the auditor came up with some other conclusion to the contracting officer completely. Okay. Now, you as a contractor are that audit report is advisory. in nature. It is not gospel. So I don't want you to think that because that auditor said so, it is so. Okay. The termination contracting officer is the person who makes the final determination. Okay. So they may follow the audit report, they may not. Okay. So keep in mind that that contracting officer is really the person you are in conversation with. Let's put it that way. Okay. Um, that was an amazing situation that we had where we had completely different, you know, results based upon the documentation. And the contractor had documentation on everything. So there's
Nice.
no guarantee, folks.
No,
Okay.
it's not too dissimilar to any pre-award audit that contractors may run into. It's the audit ends up being as part. I mean, quite frankly, in this
Mhm.
world of contract auditing, DCA auditing, whatever you want to call it, all of our audit services are essentially advisory services.
Right.
As oxymoronic as that sounds, uh, we say, this is our interpretation of what we see. We call it as we see it. We meaning auditors, because that's what I do. Half of my day typically. And so, in like a pre-award audit, we help the contracting officer come to a negotiation position. It is not a you need to negotiate to this or else, like you said, Marsha. So it's the same thing for these terminations, and in most cases than not, you know, auditors are not sharing results of the audit with the auditee because that's giving away the government's
Right.
negotiation position. That's bad negotiating strategy.
Position. Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. What you see in the settlement process and
Yep.
understanding the gives and takes.
So let me say this, the settlement proposal in excess of $100,000, the settlement proposal itself, must be reviewed by an audit agency. Now, I don't know how that's gonna play out in our current environment, Jeff, okay?
You and me both. I'm with you.
I don't know. I don't know if those proposals, the settlement proposals are gonna get stacked up. I have no idea, Jeff, okay?
Yeah.
But the audit report, like I said, and Jeff just said as well, the audit report is advisory only, okay? It may be used by the contracting officer during negotiations or as a basis for unilateral determination. They may not. Um, I can't even tell you how it's gonna go, Jeff. It can go either way,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, I agree. But but just be aware that it's not so advisory that the contracting officer has to blow off the audit results.
No.
Contracting officer, in its final justification documentation, has to acknowledge I requested an audit, and here's what the audit results were. Audit, suggested that I decrement this cost category by 20%.
Right.
And then you have to say, I disagreed with this finding based on the following rationale. After talking with the contractor, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. But they need to take it into consideration and make it look like, at least, that they considered the auditor's findings. So they can't completely blow off the audit and just be
Right.
like, as forget the audit, forget that I even asked for it. I'm giving you this dollar amount. That's not gonna happen. And and I'll say the converse too. The auditor might say, yeah, the contractor was fine submitting its legal and accounting expenses. I didn't take any exception to that. The TCO might take that and say, thanks, but I only got $2 million left. You asked for 2.5 million. Well, that 500,000 were all your advisors and all this other stuff. So how about you take $2 million? So to that point, Marsha, these talent termination settlements, end up being more business decisions instead of a
Right.
pure, did you follow the letter of the regulation and did you claim, all the dollars that you're entitled to? It's not quite the same as what I would say a typical incurred cost
No.
audit, so to speak.
Jeff, at the end of the day, it does become a business decision, okay? FAR Part 49 does say it needs to be negotiated fairly and promptly. Now, having said that, like you just said, you could be offered something different. You have to decide as a company whether you take it, whether you, yeah, I don't mean fight back, but whether you dispute some of it or whether you move on. At the end of the day, they may not have the funds or all of the funds. Okay.
Mhm.
Just because we claim it and it's valid and it's documented and it's in the audit file and it's defendable doesn't mean that you're going to get it. Okay.
Bingo.
Let me put a bow on it that way, Jeff. Okay.
Please, please.
But we have an obligation to make the claim as best we can, Jeff.
I agree.
Okay. We hope that we're going to recover it all, but we may not. So I just want to say that we're gonna always make best efforts, Jeff, to put forth every dollar that we're entitled to. Okay. When you have been terminated for convenience, you're stinging. Let's face it. You're in shock and you're stinging. And you
Yes.
do want to recover as much as you can. So you have an obligation as a contractor to do that part. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, Jeff.
Yeah, exactly. And what makes this extra difficult is even when you put in that settlement proposal, you can't classify that as an accounts receivable that a bank is going to
No.
willingly lend money to you based off of. So that makes a very challenging, delicate, I don't know what adjective you want to use, but the business, having to absorb something like this is going to be very challenging. So, your line of credit will not cover this. Do you have some other bases of capital and reserves to be able to withstand these kinds of things? I mean, easier said now, but, take this as a lesson learned, but understand that you're working with the government, keeping funds on hand and cash or cash equivalents is very critical for these reasons alone so that you can help cover
Right.
the costs incurred that you won't see reimbursed for
Quite some
12,
time.
18, who knows how many months or God, I hate to say years, right?
It's
So,
possible, Jeff.
so yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration. And that's, I think that'll help us circle from the top that, um, walking away instantly from a termination without, you know, discussing it within your stakeholders could be a really fatal mistake.
Mhm.
Um, for many different reasons, some which we didn't talk about, just, simply keeping the relationship alive for future work. I mean, you start, you go public with, your disgust and angst and just say, forget it. I'll never work for the blank department of blank. Okay. Have you never changed your mind before or
Right.
realize, or, an administration will change at some point, right? So you may change your mind. So you may want to be careful about it. Anyways, so, we talked about, not walking away, but also acknowledging that, the government has to realize that these termination clauses that they put in are not free. Uh, there's some agencies out there that'll have you print on each invoice your termination liability. That actually make you calculate it.
Right.
And so the government's aware that, oh, if I terminate this now, well, that approximately is the dollar that I owe you if I do that. So, which is great. I mean, that happens the construction side, right? Um, so yeah, so not all, that's a very infrequent instance, but many contract officers, you're not in that field, you need to realize, or those who are making these decisions, you got to think of the whole picture. So when you cut in these contracts, that doesn't automatically get you that net savings of what you didn't spend today.
Right.
So anyhow,
One
uh,
last
go please. What else you got? Yeah, I don't want
one last thought.
Okay.
I know this seems a bit far into the weeds, but you're not gonna be able to collect interest on the settlement amount if they
Great point.
take time
Great point.
to pay it, okay? It's not gonna happen.
Correct. No,
It's unlike other,
other
claims
claims.
that you yeah, unlike
Correct.
other claims, okay?
Correct. But that being said, you met a performance obligation in your statement of work during the period of performance. Submit that voucher
Yes.
right away.
Separately,
That's
separately, right,
separately and right away. And you need to be paid essentially within the prompt pay
right,
rules. And if you're not paid, then you better be getting interest when they finally do pay you.
right.
I've had that misunderstanding that when folks when you're terminated, that doesn't mean you stop invoicing for work that you actually did do.
Oh, heck no. Oh, heck no.
So I wanted to throw that out there. See, I got one last thing as well. Anyhow,
But
so we talked about the importance of documentation. I mean, that's for us GovCon nerds, how many times do we say that per presentation we give on almost every topic we give, Marcia? And you reiterated here that the importance of documentation, for you to have increase your, I don't know, let's call it the P-win or of your settlement
right.
comes down to documentation. I can't tell you the number of terminations I've gone through is like, yeah, I still don't believe what you presented here. Sure, it seems reasonable, but can you show me how you got to this exact number? So having all those general ledger records, having all those invoices, purchase orders, subcontract data, like you have to make sure you know where it
Just make
is.
sure that
How
you
to find it.
you've got to keep the documentation alive.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Expect to be audited. Expect to answer lots of questions about how you got to the numbers. And then once it gets to settlement, you try for every dollar that you have calculated, but just be aware you may not get it all. And sometimes you got to make that business decision, say, take the settlement offer versus fighting on,
Right.
whether or not you want to, take it to court down the line because of what you deem to be the entitlement.
Oh, and Jeff, there are court cases. I have
No.
lots of those in my, library of,
And
court cases that have come up because of this, so
yeah,
I'm sure we're going to see an increase in those as well.
absolutely. Marsha, what else should our listeners be taking
I
away
don't know.
from our discussion today?
I think the one thing I wanna say is that our our diligence in being compliant as we move forward can't we can't let our guard down. We have to always be compliant with the regulations, okay? So I don't want people to think that, "Oh, things are gonna get tossed to the wind." That's not the case, Jeff, okay? That's
Yeah,
not the
and
case.
in my little story about the whole you waived your right to damages to get this turned back on. I mean, that makes me a little nervous.
It does.
So yeah, be vigilant. And if something doesn't smell quite right, doesn't, not consistent with the terms of your contract, talk to counsel.
Yeah,
And then we had yet another decision. Do you fight or move on? Um, Challenging times out there.
it is,
Um,
but it's not all so bleak, okay?
I love it. I agree. I agree. And, because you're terminated, don't take it personally too. I want to throw that out
Oh,
there.
goodness, no.
When it's terminated for convenience, he's terminated for default. That's another discussion for
Different
another
thing,
day.
different thing.
Anyway, Marsha, pleasure talking with you as always. I really appreciate you taking out the time to talk with us and our listeners.
Yep,
Again, I'll give you the free plug. Secrets of Strategic Pricing for Government Contractors. It's an awesome read. Go check it out. Like
thanks, Jeff.
the people that are in the government may change, how the mission is achieved may change, but ultimately, government contractors, you're gonna have to price. You're gonna have to be competitive, probably more than ever right now.
Right,
Um, I think that's going to be a great resource for you. But either way, connect with both Marsha and myself on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear your feedback on today's episode, good, bad, and different. Any
right.
other thoughts you want to add to the conversation? We want to hear it.
Yep,
What else can Marsha and I talk to each other about that you want to hear? We'll find a way to do another session. So Marsha, thank you so much. This was so
and
much
Jeff,
fun.
thank you so much. There's just There's so much to cover in this stuff. We can't even cover it in the time we have, Jeff.
Yeah, it's complex. It's
It is.
complex, and it's okay to ask for help in
Yep.
this.
Yep.
Try not to do it alone without the experience.
Oh, God, no. Mhm.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next time.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimize podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host, Jeff Shapiro, and our guest, Marsha Lindquist. You can connect with Marsha in the links in the description. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analyzing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimize podcast.